Tú no sales, Miguel, aquí.
Ah, yo no salgo.
No.
Bueno, pues con que salga un poquito está bien.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Oh, look, it's a glass of wine. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ching.
Clean.
Ding, ding.
So, I don't know what to say. You start to talk about how you were present at the time that people began to build the dance for blues and the dance for fusion.
Yeah.
That people were struck by a gap commercial.
Yeah. I mean, the history of the fusion scene is that like the neo swing movement, like the resurgence of swing dancing in the United States in the 90s was inspired by a Gap commercial. The Gap being like a discount clothing store in the suburbs that was 30 seconds of like big aerials that inspired so many people into wanting to swing dance, and that kind of started the swing revival. We're dancing swing and lindy-hop to probably hundreds of thousands around the United States. I mean, I was growing up in Lawrence, Kansas, a town of 60,000 people at the time, and we had 300 people out dancing lindy-hop every Sunday night.
Wow.
And it was a small town. And so it was like all over, and it went from like 0 to 100 very quickly. And then after some years of that, I mean, it was like probably 5, 6, 7 years of the swing boom, the swing revival. You know, like you do with your friends, you start throwing after parties after the ballroom closes at 1 or 2. You go back to your friends' houses. You keep having a good time. You keep partying. You keep dancing. And at these parties, you play whatever music you play at your parties, which the time was everything from like Massive Attack, because it was the 90s, to Portishead, to Michael Jackson, to everything you could imagine. Anything that you would play at a party, we had. And because we were partner dancers, the way that we knew to communicate with one another was through dancing, through partner dancing, and that's how it started. Just a lot of after-hour house parties to party music with lindy hoppers. And you know, we called it the blues parties, we called it the house party scene, we called it the after parties. We called ourselves blues dancers. And, you know, actually why we called ourselves blues dancers is something that is really interesting and I actually want to look into. Because we weren't blues dancing. There was no historical looking back at what was happening in blues dancing in like Black America historically beforehand, unlike what was happening with the lindy hop scene, where there was a lot of importance of like bringing out the older dancers like Frankie Manning and others, and a lot of like looking at history and being inspired by history. And the blues party scenes were just parties, and then for many years, and that's why like that was really the birth of the fusion scene, because we weren't really blues dancing, we were just dancing to whatever music in the way that we danced in the lindy hop parties.
It was maybe some blues as well. Did you like blues?
We did play some blues music, but the blues music was like remixes of Nina Simone and David Bublé. There very little of the music would be ones that maybe one and maybe a few songs a night. And you know, every scene, you know, every city and scene had its own experience of this. Like I was dancing in Denver, I was dancing in Portland, Chicago, Kansas City. Like I was traveling a lot at the time.
Did they have many differences between scenes?
Yeah, there was a lot of differences, but it was also like they were all lindy hoppers. They were all lindy hoppers that would travel to the big festivals. We all knew each other. It was definitely a community, and we all traveled a lot, just like the dance scenes here travel to festivals. And it was centered around traveling to festivals because we were lindy hoppers that did that. And yeah, and then after a while, the scene developed. You know, we were interested in like the history of dancing, being lindy hop dancers and into Balboa, and a lot of the black vernacular dances that came out of the United States historically. And we started to investigate like what was happening historically, and like the early 2000s, like where I was, it was in Denver and Portland, it was like 2004, 2005. There started to be like bringing out like Barry Douglas, like Brenda Russell out of Portland, Oregon, was bringing Barry Douglas out of retirement from teaching dance, who was a older black man out of Detroit, Michigan, and she would fly him in once a month to train with him in Portland, and she would like run workshops with him in Portland because she wanted to train with him, but she didn't want to have to pay for his flight and his expenses, so she would have a workshop that she would organize so that she could train with him, and we all studied with Barry. And it kind of began this looking into what the history of of the black vernacular dance that was and is blues dancing, and it really came out of the same house party scene. So it came out of people it kind of came out of lindy-hop after hours parties that were dancing to party music, that then later got inspired by the history of blues and started doing their research and studying the historical dance of blues. So as a way, they kind of like blues and fusion came out of the same scene, and then later same community, and it was one dance. Like we were all the same dance community. We danced both dances, and then later it's split.
Okay, you were looking for resources for dances, like learning new techniques or all techniques, but to apply in new ways, or just the historical archaeology of which dances were in the past to recover them, like
the development of the blues community.
Yeah, it's like people knew the recovering of lindy-hop, and maybe they thought it could be other dances that they were dancing, and they get not lost but slow, get a little slow, and now we can recover like we did with the lindy-hop. Was part of it?
Yeah, it was bringing out older African American dancers and like getting training from them, hiring them for events, having them teach. Other people would try and find old videos from old movies. Just like Lindy Hoppers would do with Hell's a Poppin'. Similar things, kind of anything that people could find.
Nice.
And like those, to be honest, like a lot of those dances still exist and are living in the United States. We're separate communities than what we were at the time. And they were in other black communities that were still alive, whether it was like out in New Orleans with like parts like the Louisiana swing, or out of Detroit with two-stepping communities. Like there's communities that are still existing that are coming out of that black history, but they're mostly African American communities, and we're quite separate from, as a Euro American, like the communities, like quite segregated, and it was an interesting. It was an interesting experience of, bringing it out.
And were you experimenting with different techniques and dances, like you use some tango moves and you apply to blues, or?
Are you talking about with fusion?
I was talking at this time that when fusion or the house party community, they were dancing blues or researching blues, and they were dancing fusion, and they did one and the other in a creative way, as well as an historical researching, getting close to the black community.
I mean, like in the early years of the house party scene, we just were taking whatever dances we did and would put it into what worked and was fun. I was also dancing tango, and I would bring certain tango movements in. Joe and Nell, who are teachers of mine out of Denver, Colorado, were big into ballroom, as well as like Lindy and swing would bring lots of movements into the house party scene through those movements, and with drag, like slow drag blues as they called it, or just slow drag. There was a lot of influence from West Coast swing as well. And also, like, while those were where we were coming from in terms of the dance abilities and tools that we had as a dance community, like it also like became its own vernacular. Like it became its own idiom dance. Like we were, like, you know, to go through the chronology of how the dancing changed over 10 years of it just being an underground house party scene with no instructors, really. Like we were just, you know, you could imagine what lindy hoppers would look like, right? Dancing slow and close with their like butts out, trying to look for connection and extension. And then when the spaces got really crowded, the music slowed down, like doing that for thousands of hours a month together, and then years and years and years of it, like an actual, like its own dance movement came out of it. And like the dance has changed a lot. And to be honest, like the communities, the house party scenes, moving into like looking at like the historical roots of blues and being interested in like American Black vernacular dances, really influenced where the fusion scene, what would later be called the fusion scene at the time was the house party scene, was really influenced by it. And these like kind of these dances, this community kind of grew together, and it was one, like the blues and fusion community. But we didn't have the word fusion at the time, and we called ourselves.
Did you use it at that time?
People, I would say, kind of embarrassingly, people would say that they were blues dancers or the blues scene. Other people called it the house party scene or the after hours. Nice. And then after, you know, there was this big reckoning of like, that's not blues dancing. I'm like, well, we're not really trying to blues dance. And like, well, and there wasn't a thing within our community called blues dancing at the time. And so, and there was like this big era of ripping the word blues away, which like totally needed to happen. And then what is the name of it? There was a lot of ideas like alt blues, which was more what I was fighting for at the time, because I had lived in Buenos Aires and got to see like tango dancing and milongas, and also the alt tango spaces where there are tango dancers dancing to alternative music with different forms. And I was like, oh, that's kind of what's happening here, especially after myself and other, like my cohort of instructors and dancers in the scene were really like diving into the blues scene. Many if not all of the dancers that are teaching right now from the United States that are teaching blues came out of the same after hours house party scene, taught at fusion events back when the communities were one community. Back when, like, there were years when the parties would, like, a blues event would have what we call at the time traditional blues, which is funny to reflect on the words we used, right? Traditional blues in quotation, right? But they're blues, right? And then later we'd say, oh, it's alt blues, like after 1 o'clock or after midnight. And then there'd be like the big events would have like a blues room and then alternative blues or the alternative room, kind of like this weekend at Cocoa. And then it was one community, and then there was a, you know, we call it that kind of, people refer to it as the Great Divide. It was this like, but every dancer danced both, you know, and then, and you know, people had like which room they would prefer. If they showed up early to the dance, or they showed up at midnight and wanted to dance the late night, if they stayed for the whole thing, you know, people had their preferences, but everyone danced both what's now referred to as blues and fusion. And it was one community, and then there was this Great Divide that happened, which, you know, came out of...
When, more or less, did it happen? Where the two scenes began to grow farther?
Grow apart. I mean, I would have to like look at. I mean, I don't want to, with this being an interview, to say a date, but it was probably like, you know, there were conflicts happening. You know, 2010 was certainly like probably before that. I mean, I could look back at.
Well,
dates.
we put
it's
the info, the right info in some letters, and the real correction.
Yeah, and you know, there were things like Mile High Blues in Denver when that was first happening. It was Blues Summit, the Mile High, which was like 2007. Was a time when there was no difference. It was one community. Okay. At like 2007, Mile High Blues, 2006, 2007, like was a time when there was no question of what it was. I mean, I think like every dance has, you know, it starts with a street dance and a cultural dance, and then as it becomes bigger and bigger and is taught more outside of culture, because these dances come out of culture, whether it's an underground house party scene in the late 90s in the United States with fusion, or it's bachata and merengue, or like in Puerto Rico or in Puerto Rico communities. Like they come out of a culture, and then as they become more popular and they travel outside of that culture where they come from, then there becomes a standardization that is necessary, but it puts it. I feel like when the standardization gets too rigid, it loses, and it becomes like a studio dance, right? It like breaks apart from the street dance, the culture of it, and it becomes a studio culture instead of a street culture. And they're both, and I think at that point they really do become separate dances, because like the dances, I don't think they're a language. They're not separate from a culture, and everything. When the word fusion came about as the name, like I hated it.
Why?
Really it's because one of my big dance influences and teachers, Brenda Russell, like with her words, she was like, every single dance is a fusion of culture.
Yeah.
Every single dance. There's not a dance that exists on the planet that's not a fusion of different dances and cultures and times. We don't, it's a very white American thing to think that we are the fusion. What we're doing is different and special. And I really think that is true. And that's why I was like, no, we can't call it fusion. I think this is like all culture is a fusion. All new dances are a fusion. And then in the end, I didn't win the naming battles. And also if like the thing.
What were you proposing at that time?
At the time I was producing alt blues because I had been living in Buenos Aires, and I was like, oh, this is something that could like already has context. But also now, like I don't know if that would have been. I wouldn't think now reflecting on it, I would have been pleased with that name in retrospect.
Yeah.
I think fusion has, I think it gives a lot of. It gets to allow much more in the dance, like a fusion of other dances as an ideal in the fusion dance space, I think is interesting. And I think that while what was happening in the house party scene was more an after-hours party of lindy-hoppers doing their own party thing that developed as its own idiom and its own dance form, but that the word fusion, which really was an event that in 2006 that Ivy Gray hosted, and Ivy Gray was more of a West Coast swing dancer than a lindy hopper, and the fusion exchange, was one that was combining different dances, and it was like another arm of what was happening in the dance in the house party scene. And so you have like the idiom dance of like lindy hoppers like dancing to party music, right? You have this one really influenced by blues later on, like years after it began, into it, very influenced by like researching and looking into like the kind of the neo with the blues revival, movement. And then you have the idea of like fusion as a combination of like established dances, as like another thing that like exists in the fusion dance community. And I think like all three of those are kind of held as pillars at the same time, and I think it's also why there's a lot of confusion for what fusion actually is because it's all three of these at the same time. It is an idiom dance that came out of an underground house party scene, and that's actually different in different cities. It is the combination of different dances that have their own communities, and it is a space that has like a culture that holds it as well, like, and it's like a conceptual space that we create. And I think that and I personally think that I try and make sure that all three of those pillars are kind of held as important, and I really think like the cultural piece is one that is like people feel but they like aren't as aware of, because as fusion is becoming more and more popular and people that haven't traveled as much aren't aware actually of like the history of it. Like, oh, it's new, it's exciting, it like says yes to everything, which I think it doesn't say yes to everything, and that there are values, and they're like just like imagining that Spain says yes to everything is just wrong, right? And, how do we invite people into the culture of the fusion scene and be like, oh, like everything is valuable and this is the culture that's important here. Like this is the history of it. This is what we're trying to hold. Yes, it does value lots of things. It is very diverse and there are values here. And I think this is a thing that, especially after COVID, when a lot of, I feel like the older dancers, like, culture is something that every person in the dance room passes on. Like the organizers and the teachers pass it on, but everyone in the room passes on culture silently. And I think 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, before COVID, like there would always be a bunch of old timers that were in the room helping pass down all of that culture overtly or silently about where fusion came from and what it valued. And it was and each and every one of those individuals were passing that on. And I think COVID made it to where a lot of the older dancers, they moved on, they got real jobs, they started families, they got into Zouk, they like moved into other places. And unless you were making a living at it and teaching, like a lot of the older dancers didn't come back to it. And so I think right now is a moment where like the culture of fusion is lacking in a lot of the spaces that I'm traveling between. And it's it's like just being aware of that as a new project, because that wasn't a problem, I would say 5 or 10 years ago. And now, like I've just traveling and teaching Europe the last 4 months, realizing, oh wow, like I'm constantly in a room of 50, 100 fusion dancers that don't know the history of fusion dance. They don't even know what it is. Like, I like start my classes being like, who here knows what fusion dance is? And people are afraid to say because they aren't confident in what they would say. But they're all there for some reason.
Sure.
Which is really provocative and interesting. Like they're all there for some reason and they don't know what it is. And this is like a very interesting thing to me. I'm like, wow, okay. Where I think 10 years ago, everyone would have an answer. And they might be different answers that would all fall within one of those 3 categories, but they at least would know what it is. Right? They would have an answer. They wouldn't be embarrassed to say it because they were afraid of being wrong. Because they actually just don't. They haven't been in a space that holds it.
That something good or something interesting about that is like nowadays, even if people don't know the historical roots, sometimes they're very linked and they honor those 3 pillars you were talking about. That's pretty, because even if nobody approached to tell them the line and the path the dance arrive and how they arrive to them, this idea of community, this idea of freedom and inclusion, this idea of grassroots and this idea of supporting, this idea of being innovative and that culture is something that evolves and the dance is something that we can keep open and creative. I see that resonates to the people and that attract people even if they don't know, even if they don't dance swing.
Absolutely.
So it's like the special place of fusion or alt or whatever you want to call it is that it's different from any style, because every style will teach you the correct way to do that, the correct way to dance, the correct way to interact. This is the way you should do, this is not the way you should do. And in fusion people have this feeling of all the tools that I bring, all the dances that I bring here, I can propose and offer others to share and to see how it works and to play with new music and to experiment. So there's a moment that what attracts people to the fusion, even if they don't know, they are attracted by the same reasons. You are talking about the community back there in the open house party.
Yeah,
that's
no,
wonderful.
I think that's absolutely true. I definitely see that. There are people that are coming because they're attracted to the same thing. It's like this openness, this allowingness, which has its hardships, like it's, as someone that really values like a high level of dance, that studied dance for 25 years, it's like I want just if I don't when Americans come and decide to live in Spain and don't have any interest in learning Spanish, I ask the question, why are you here? Like, are you here for Spain? Or are you just here because you like to consume the food? Are you here to interact with the people? Are you here for relationships to feel good? Like, you don't have to be good at Spanish, right? For Spaniards to feel like they're being said yes to. You can just, like, be working on it. That it's important to know that it's valuable to them. And I feel like it's a similar type of thing where when I feel people are coming into the fusion scene and are just coming from ecstatic dance or from... like more like new age spiritual communities that are like have this movement but it's not partnered, and they're just like, I'm valuable here and this is I can do whatever I want because it's fusion. And I'm like, oh, like there is a culture, it is held in partnered dance, it is held in a history of connection that feels a certain way, and that when people, for me it is very important that we uphold that, like, these values are important. And
Totally.
And I think that's like there's this. It's been quite the struggle in the fusion scene. 'Cause, like, how do we make sure that everyone knows that they're valuable?
Sure.
And we're very like allowing for people to come in and bring things, but also like actually these things are important to us.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be good at it, but they have to. If you're gonna be here, we would like them to be important to you too.
And good news, what I saw is people that came from personal growth and approach to fusion dance scene. Even if a bunch of them approach, when they met how is the partner dancing technique, they feel it and they say, wow. And what they're doing now is they're learning. Contact people. When they start to dance partner in fusion dance, sometimes they start to think, okay, maybe I should West Coast or blues, definitely blues. A lot of fusioners that came from personal growth now are
going
courses into blues. They're learning blues,
like a salon or like a studio dance, and it's a dance product because it's left the culture, and then you have the street dance, and on the street there's dialects, everything's different, right? It's very diverse, and diversity is like what we are reaching for, right? And culture holds itself from like the grandparents that are being like, stop being a dick to your friends, or like, you do a better job. Like, if you can't dance with anyone, you don't know how to dance at all. Like if he's like the best dancers can dance with anybody, as opposed to like a studio dance might be like performance. If it doesn't look right, it's not right. If it doesn't follow these guidelines, and they're just different. And like McDonald's is very different than a barbecue that you're gonna have at your house, right? And I think the problem with a lot of these conversations is that like they try and conflate the two, where like one is like McDonald's is a commodified dance product, and the value in it is that you can go to a McDonald's anywhere in the world and get the exact same thing, consistent. It looks the same, it feels the same. It's also boring and without culture and without richness, but it's consistent. Just like, and it might even be really impressive because it really perfected it, and it's cheap, and it's very. And then culture is very different. It's confusing, it's dynamic, it's diverse, it's not going to be the same. It might be good, might be bad. It's like, who the fuck knows? It's individual. And, like, I think ideally they both get to exist next to each other, and that people know how to talk about it. So people at least know what they're getting themselves into. And they don't judge a studio dance with street dance values or cultural values, and they don't judge a cultural dance form with that of like a dance product or a studio.
And the other two we did a little bit is reason to dance fusion, which are the reasons. And the other topic is community dances, community scenes, school, egos, trademark, business.
Right.
And more or less we were talking about that too.
Yeah.
So for me, I think we cover everything.
Great. Yeah. I mean, that's it's really neat to see that fusion is like having it's just continuing to grow in Europe. Like I lived in Europe and was lived in Europe for 5 years and was here teaching and living for 10. COVID took me back to the United States, and being mostly out of Europe for the last 4 years, coming back and seeing it being bigger and stronger than ever before, especially in places like Barcelona. It's like really neat to see I mean, it's cool. Like, I remember when I was here before, the project was, all right, get people excited about fusion, get the word out about fusion, grow the fusion scene. And now the question is, all these people are interested in it. How do we, like, make it all fit? How do we, like, have it make sense? Like, there's so much desire and excitement. And how do we kind of cultivate the scene into something that feels really good, as opposed to how do we get people interested?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's neat. Yeah, it's neat to see that fusion has like kind of come into a new phase. Yeah, here in Barcelona.
Well, sometimes I thought as a urban geographer that California and Barcelona have many similarities.
Definitely.
And since the people, the way, their quirkiness, their indie, and since fusion is huge in California.
Right.
Maybe, or probably, it will grow in Barcelona as well.
I mean, the largest fusion scene in the world is in San Francisco.
Yep.
And the largest fusion scene in Europe, I think right now, is in Barcelona. So, yeah.
And Valencia. Very homey, communal. Now, right now, it's true that maybe I don't know well this time where it was a super big school, the double shot, and the huge events. But now, after that, they're doing this kind of homey-based and communal grassroots thing that's interesting.
Yeah, that's what's also happened in the States. Is I think COVID was really hard on dance communities, as we've already talked about, and I think that, there's still dancers that want to get together and dance, and houses and bars and live music out at clubs is like where it happens. Like, it doesn't have to happen in a school. It doesn't have to happen around a class and a festival. It can happen anywhere. Yes. I think that's happening a lot in the United States right now, where there's similar to Valencia, that had giant thriving scenes, and then like the individuals or the schools that were cultivating that, I guess would be the cultural center of it, no longer exist or aren't around anymore. And then, but the dancers are still there, and they're still dancing and they do it in their ways.
They dance under every circumstance at the end.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty moment. I think it's after COVID, things are spinning and growing up again, and it's kind of a creative and beautiful moment.
It really is. It's cool. Yeah, it's been really fun to be here these last 4 months teaching in Europe and kind of reconnecting with the European blues and fusion community after being away for 4 years.
We hope to have you more.
Yeah, I'll be back for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great.